The sound of the blazing torch echoed through the kitchen as little Emma's scream pierced the entire house. "My hand hurts so much, please stop," she begged, while Victoria's blowtorch flame danced menacingly in her grip. At that exact moment, the door burst open, and James Mitchell, the millionaire father, faced the most shocking scene of his life. But the horrifying truth behind this moment stretched back 3 days earlier. James Mitchell's Bentley glided into the private parking area of Mitchell Tower in Manhattan. The 42-year-old tech millionaire stepped out of his vehicle in a charcoal Hugo Boss suit, his iPhone buzzing with endless notifications. As the founder and CEO of Mitchell Technologies, a company worth over $2.8 billion, James lived in a world where every second counted, every decision mattered, and every meeting could change millions of lives. But what he didn't know was that in his $15 million penthouse overlooking Central Park, his 7-year-old daughter, Emma, was about to experience the beginning of 3 days that would forever change her innocent world. Emma sat in the marble-floored living room of their luxurious home, carefully arranging her collection of porcelain dolls that her late mother, Sarah, had given her. Each doll held a memory, each tiny dress a whisper of the woman who had loved her more than life itself. Sarah Mitchell had died in a tragic car accident just 18 months ago, leaving behind a devastated husband and a little girl who still waited by the window every evening, hoping to see her mother's smile walking through the front door. The sound of designer heels clicking against the imported Italian marble announced Victoria's arrival. Victoria Sterling Mitchell, 32 years old, had become Emma's stepmother just 6 months ago. To the outside world, she was the picture of elegance and grace, a former model turned philanthropist who had captured the heart of one of New York's most eligible widowers. Her auburn hair was always perfectly styled, her wardrobe filled with pieces from the most exclusive designers, and her smile could charm anyone in any room. "Emma, darling." Victoria's voice carried that honey-sweet tone she always used when others might be listening. "What are you doing sitting on the floor like that? Young ladies don't play on dirty floors." Emma looked up, her wide blue eyes so much like her mother's, reflecting confusion. "But Mummy used to play dolls with me on this floor," she said. Imagination doesn't need fancy furniture. Something flickered behind Victoria's perfectly applied makeup. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly, like a mask slipping just for a fraction of a second. "Well, your mother isn't here anymore, is she? And I have different rules." The little girl's shoulders dropped slightly, but she obediently began gathering her dolls. As she reached for her favorite, a blonde-haired doll in a blue dress that looked remarkably like her mother, Victoria's heel, accidentally on purpose, stepped on the doll's delicate hand, snapping off 2 tiny porcelain fingers. "Oh my," Victoria said with exaggerated concern, though her eyes held no warmth. "How clumsy of me. I suppose you should be more careful about where you leave your toys." Emma's eyes filled with tears as she picked up the broken pieces. She can't be fixed. Mummy said this doll was special because ... Because what?" Victoria's voice had lost its sweetness, replaced by something colder. "Because she looks like Mummy," Emma whispered, cradling the damaged doll to her chest. Victoria crouched down, bringing her face level with Emma's. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, meant only for the child's ears. "Listen to me very carefully, little girl. Your mother is gone, dead. And all these silly fantasies about her coming back or watching over you, they're just that, fantasies. I'm your mother now, and you'll learn to respect that. Or..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The threat hung in the air like a dark cloud, and Emma's small frame began to tremble. The sound of the front door opening echoed through the penthouse, followed by James's voice calling out, "I'm home." In an instant, Victoria's demeanor transformed. The cold mask vanished, replaced by radiant warmth. She stood gracefully, smoothing her burgundy dress, and called back, "Darling, we're in the living room. Emma was just showing me her beautiful dolls." James appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie after another grueling day of board meetings and corporate decisions. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, his usually sharp eyes showing the exhaustion of a man carrying the weight of a global empire. At 6'2", with broad shoulders and a presence that commanded attention, James Mitchell looked every inch the powerful CEO he was. But when he looked at his daughter, something in his expression softened. "Hey there, princess," he said, his voice gentle despite his fatigue. "How was your day?" Emma opened her mouth to speak, to tell him about the broken doll, about the strange fear that had been growing in her chest lately, but Victoria was faster. "Oh, she's been such an angel," Victoria said, moving to James's side and placing a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. "We've been having the most wonderful afternoon together, haven't we, Emma?" The little girl looked from Victoria's expectant face to her father's tired but hopeful expression. Something inside her, some protective instinct, made her nod. "Yes, Daddy." "I'm so glad," James said, relief evident in his voice. Since Sarah's death, his biggest fear had been that Emma would never accept another maternal figure in her life. Seeing her seemingly bonding with Victoria felt like a small miracle. "Victoria, you've been incredible with her. I know Sarah would be grateful that Emma has someone like you." At the mention of Sarah's name, Victoria's grip on James's arm tightened slightly, though her smile never wavered. "Sarah was a lucky woman to have such a beautiful daughter. And I consider myself lucky to be part of Emma's life now." But Emma caught something in Victoria's tone, something that made her skin crawl. When adults spoke, she had learned to listen, not just to their words, but to the feelings underneath them. And the feeling underneath Victoria's words was something dark and hungry. "Daddy," Emma ventured hesitantly, "could we have story time tonight? Like we used to with Mummy?" James's expression grew pained. Since Sarah's death, their bedtime routine had gradually disappeared. The stories Sarah used to tell, the songs she used to sing, the gentle way she tucked Emma in it was all too painful for James to recreate. "Princess, Daddy's really tired tonight, maybe tomorrow." "I could tell her a story," Victoria offered sweetly. "I know some wonderful tales." "That's perfect," James said gratefully. "Victoria, you're a godsend." As Victoria guided Emma toward the stairs, the little girl cast one last look back at her father. He was already pulling out his laptop, returning to the world of emails and conference calls that seemed to consume him more and more each day. He didn't see the way Victoria's fingers pressed just a little too firmly into Emma's shoulder, or the way her smile disappeared the moment his attention was elsewhere. In Emma's bedroom, a princess-themed sanctuary that Sarah had lovingly designed with hand-painted murals and custom furniture, Victoria sat on the edge of the small bed. The room still smelled faintly of Sarah's lavender perfume, a scent that Victoria had grown to despise. "Now then," Victoria said, her voice taking on that false sweetness again, "what kind of story would you like to hear? Could you tell me about the princess who saves the kingdom?" Emma asked hopefully. "Mummy used to say I was brave like her." Victoria's smile became edged. "Oh, darling, I think you're confused. Princesses don't save kingdoms. They sit quietly, they obey their elders, and they never ever cause trouble for the people taking care of them." Emma's brow furrowed. "But Mummy said." "Your mother," Victoria interrupted, her voice dropping to a whisper, "told you many things that weren't true. She filled your head with silly ideas about being special, about being brave, about being important. But the truth is, little girls who don't listen, who don't follow rules, who think they're more important than they are, ... Well, bad things happen to little girls like that." The child's eyes widened with fear, but Victoria continued, her voice hypnotically soft and terrifying. "So here's a better story for you, Emma. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who thought she was special. She thought her daddy loved her more than anyone else in the world. But then her daddy found someone new, someone better, someone who made him happier than that little girl ever could. And do you know what happened to that little girl?" Emma shook her head, unable to speak. She realized that if she wanted to stay in her daddy's house, if she wanted to keep having food to eat and clothes to wear, she had to be very, very good. She had to stop telling stories about her mummy. She had to stop asking for attention. She had to become invisible, like a little mouse. Because if she didn't... Victoria leaned closer, her breath hot against Emma's ear. If she didn't, she might find herself somewhere far away from her daddy. Somewhere dark and cold, where little girls who aren't wanted go to disappear. Emma's whole body was shaking now, tears streaming down her face, but she was too terrified to make a sound. "Now," Victoria said, straightening up and smoothing her dress, her voice returning to its public sweetness. "What do we say when someone tells us a story?" Thank you," Emma whispered. "Good girl, and what do we remember about our conversation?" That I need to be good. Very good. And if you ever think about telling your daddy about our special talks, just remember, who do you think he'll believe? His beautiful wife who loves him so much, or a confused little girl who's still sad about her mummy? Victoria stood, moving toward the door. "Sweet dreams, Emma. Tomorrow is going to be a very important day for you to practice being the invisible little mouse we talked about." The door closed with a soft click, leaving Emma alone in the darkness that suddenly felt full of watching eyes and threatening shadows. She clutched her broken doll to her chest, the porcelain fragments cutting into her small fingers. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the fear that had wrapped itself around her heart like ice-cold chains. Down the hall, she could hear Victoria's laughter mixing with her father's. The sound of two adults sharing wine and conversation, while completely unaware that a little girl's world had just been shattered as surely as her mother's porcelain doll. Emma lay awake until the first grey light of dawn crept through her windows, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand how the person who was supposed to protect her had become the thing she most needed protection from. And somewhere in her 7-year-old mind, a terrible understanding began to take root. She was completely, utterly alone. What Emma didn't know was that this was only the beginning. Victoria's mask had slipped just enough to reveal the darkness underneath. But the real horror, the systematic campaign of terror and cruelty that would unfold over the next 3 days, was yet to come. And in just 72 hours, her father would walk through the kitchen door to witness a scene that would haunt him for the rest of his life. That night, Emma didn't sleep. Victoria's words circled her mind like vultures, and every shadow in her room seemed to whisper threats. When morning finally came, the little girl had learned her first lesson in fear: that darkness doesn't end with daylight when it lives inside the people who are supposed to protect you. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Mitchell penthouse, casting golden rays across the marble floors that Emma had learned to walk across as silently as a ghost. From the kitchen came the sounds of breakfast being prepared, not by Victoria, of course, but by Maria, their housekeeper, whose gentle Spanish accent had always been a source of comfort for Emma. But now, even Maria's presence felt different, tainted by the fear that Victoria might be watching, listening, waiting for Emma to make the mistake of seeking comfort from anyone. "Emma, breakfast." Victoria's voice rang out sickeningly sweet for anyone who might be listening. The little girl made her way to the dining room, where a feast was laid out on the mahogany table: fresh croissants, imported jams, organic fruits arranged like artwork, and freshly squeezed orange juice in crystal glasses. It was the kind of breakfast that would photograph beautifully for Victoria's social media posts about their perfect family life. James sat at the head of the table, already dressed in another expensive suit, his attention divided between his breakfast and the tablet displaying his morning briefings. Victoria had positioned herself perfectly close enough to James to play the devoted wife, but with clear sightlines to Emma so she could monitor every move the child made. "Good morning, Princess," James said absently, not looking up from his screen. "Did you sleep well?" Emma opened her mouth to speak, but Victoria was faster. "She slept like an angel, didn't you, sweetheart? We had such a lovely chat before bedtime." The way Victoria emphasized the word chat made Emma's stomach twist with nausea. She nodded silently, taking her seat at the far end of the table. The seat Victoria had designated as hers, far enough from James that any whispered conversation would be impossible. "That's wonderful," James said, finally glancing up with a tired smile. "I'm so glad you two are bonding. Victoria, you've been incredible with her." As Victoria basked in the praise, Emma noticed something that made her blood run cold. On Victoria's finger was a ring she'd never seen before, Sarah's wedding ring. The vintage platinum band with the small, perfect diamond that Sarah had worn every day of her marriage. The ring that Emma had seen, James placed gently in Sarah's jewelry box after the funeral, promising to keep it safe for when Emma was old enough to decide what to do with her mother's things. "Victoria," Emma said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, "that's my mummy's ring." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victoria's smile never wavered, but her eyes became predatory. "Oh, this old thing. Your father gave it to me, didn't you, darling?" James looked up, confusion flickering across his face. What ring?" "Sarah's wedding ring," Victoria said smoothly, holding up her hand so the diamond caught the light. "You said it was silly to let such a beautiful piece of jewelry sit unused in a dusty box. You said Sarah would want someone to wear it who could appreciate its beauty." Emma watched her father's face carefully. She saw the moment of uncertainty, the way his brow furrowed as he tried to remember a conversation that she was certain had never happened. But she also saw the exhaustion there, the way grief and overwork had made his memory unreliable, and she realized with growing horror that he wasn't going to challenge Victoria's lie. Yes, of course," James said slowly. "It's beautiful on you." "Thank you, darling," Victoria purred, then turned to Emma with mock sympathy. "I hope you don't mind, sweet Emma. Your father thought it would be a lovely way to honor your mother's memory." Emma's small hands clenched into fists under the table. "But Daddy, you said—" "Emma," Victoria interrupted, her voice still honey-sweet, but with an undertone of warning that only the child could hear. "It's not polite to argue with adults. Your father has made his decision, and good little girls accept what their parents decide." The word parents hit Emma like a physical blow. Victoria was claiming a title that belonged to only one person, the woman whose ring she now wore like a trophy. "But she's not," my Emma began. "Sweetheart," James said, and Emma's heart shattered a little more at the gentle reproach in his voice. "Victoria is part of our family now, and family means sharing, doesn't it?" Emma felt tears burning behind her eyes, but Victoria's warning from the night before echoed in her mind. "Who do you think he'll believe?" She nodded mutely, cutting her waffle into tiny pieces she had no intention of eating. "That's my good girl," Victoria said with satisfaction. "Now, James, don't you have that important meeting this morning?" "Damn," James muttered, checking his watch. "The Tokyo call. I should have left 10 minutes ago." He stood quickly, grabbing his briefcase and kissing Victoria's cheek. "Take care of my girls," he said, and Emma noted with growing despair that he didn't even look in her direction as he rushed out. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the penthouse like a death knell. Emma found herself alone with Victoria for the first time since their bedtime story the night before. For a long moment, the only sound was the gentle clinking of Victoria's jewelry as she delicately ate her breakfast. Then, without warning, her demeanor changed completely. "Well," Victoria said, her voice dropping to its natural tone, cold, calculating, and completely devoid of the warmth she'd performed for James. "That went better than expected. Your father is even more gullible than I thought." Emma said nothing, but Victoria wasn't looking for a response. "Do you see how easy that was, Emma? How quickly he believed me over you. How readily he gave me your precious mother's ring." Victoria held up her hand, examining the diamond with satisfaction. "This is just the beginning, little girl. By the time I'm finished, everything your mother had, everything she was, will belong to me, including your father's love." Emma's small voice was barely audible. "Why are you doing this?" Victoria laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Why? Because I can. Because your father is weak and lonely and desperate for someone to take care of the burden you represent. Because your mother is dead and buried, and I'm very much alive." She stood up, moving around the table with predatory grace until she was standing directly behind Emma's chair. The little girl could smell Victoria's expensive perfume, could feel the heat radiating from her body as she leaned down to whisper in her ear. "Here's what's going to happen, Emma. You're going to become invisible. You're going to stop talking to your father unless spoken to. You're going to stop mentioning your mother. You're going to stop asking for attention, affection, or anything else that might remind your father that you exist. And if you're very, very good at being invisible, maybe I'll let you stay. And if I'm not good, Emma whispered. Victoria's smile was razor sharp. Then I'll make sure your father realizes what a burden you've become. How much easier his life would be without a constant reminder of his dead wife cluttering up his perfect new life. There are schools, Emma, very special schools for troubled children whose parents can't handle them anymore. Schools very far away, where little girls who cause problems learn to disappear permanently. Emma's whole body was trembling now, but Victoria wasn't finished. Of course, I'll cry beautiful tears when we send you away. I'll tell everyone how hard I tried to love you, how impossible you made it. Your father will comfort me, and will make new children better children who actually belong to both of us. And you'll be nothing but a sad memory that we'll both be grateful to forget. The cruelty in Victoria's voice was breathtaking, but it was the casual way she delivered these threats that truly terrified Emma. This wasn't anger or jealousy, this was planned, calculated destruction. Now, Victoria said, straightening up and smoothing her dress, let's practice being invisible. You're going to clean up this breakfast mess, and then you're going to go to your room and stay there until I decide you can come out. And Emma, the little girl looked up, tears streaming down her face. If Maria asks where I am, you're going to tell her I'm upstairs taking a phone call. If anyone calls for your father, you're going to say he's in a meeting. And if anyone asks if you're okay, you're going to smile and say you've never been happier. Do you understand? Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. Good. Oh, and Emma, that broken doll of yours, the one that looks like your mother, I think it's time to throw it away. Broken things have no place in our beautiful home. With that, Victoria glided out of the dining room, leaving Emma alone with the debris of her demolished world. The little girl sat in the silence for a long moment, then mechanically began clearing the table, her small hands shaking as she stacked the expensive plates. When Maria found her 20 minutes later, scrubbing the marble countertop with tears streaming down her face, the kind housekeeper immediately knelt beside her. "¿Qué pasa, menina?" What's wrong? Maria asked in her gentle voice, reaching out to touch Emma's shoulder. Emma flinched away automatically, Victoria's threats fresh in her mind. Nothing, Maria, I'm just cleaning. Victoria said I should help more. Maria's dark eyes narrowed slightly. In the 18 months since Sarah's death, she had watched this bright, laughing child gradually fade into a shadow of herself. And in the 6 months since Victoria's arrival, the transformation had accelerated dramatically. "Where is Mrs. Victoria?" Maria asked carefully. "Upstairs, taking a phone call," Emma recited obediently. "And how are you feeling today, Pequega?" Emma forced her lips into a smile that looked more like a grimace. "I've never been happier." The words tasted like poison in her mouth, but she could see Victoria's reflection in the chrome surface of the refrigerator behind Maria. She was standing at the top of the stairs, watching, listening, making sure Emma performed her part perfectly. Maria wasn't fooled for a second, but she also wasn't sure what she could do. Victoria had made it clear from the beginning that the household staff were to follow her instructions without question, and James was so rarely home that opportunities to speak with him privately were non-existent. "Okay, mi amor," Maria said softly, "but you remember if you ever need to talk? Tia Maria, Izetta." "See?" Emma nodded, but they both knew it was an empty promise. Victoria had made sure of that. The rest of the day passed in a blur of enforced solitude. Emma spent hours in her room, not playing with her toys, but sitting perfectly still on her bed, practicing being invisible. She could hear Victoria moving through the house below, making phone calls, rearranging furniture, systematically erasing every trace of Sarah's presence from the home she had loved. Around noon, Victoria appeared in Emma's doorway with a large garbage bag. "Time to clean up," she announced cheerfully. "All these old toys are so childish, don't you think? Let's make room for some age-appropriate activities." Emma watched in silent horror as Victoria swept through her room like a tornado, grabbing beloved stuffed animals, books her mother had read to her, the art supplies they had used together. Everything went into the bag, every tangible connection to the mother she had lost. "Please," Emma whispered when Victoria reached for the broken doll. "Please don't take her. I can fix her. I can." "Broken things can't be fixed, Emma," Victoria said firmly. "They can only be thrown away." She dropped the doll into the bag with deliberate cruelty, and Emma heard the remaining porcelain pieces shatter completely. The sound was like her heart breaking all over again. "There," Victoria said with satisfaction, surveying the nuptial room, "much better. A clean slate for your new life." That evening, when James returned home, he found Emma sitting at the dinner table like a perfect little statue. She answered his questions with single words, smiled when expected, and showed no emotion whatsoever. Victoria beamed with pride at how well-behaved Emma had become. "She's been an absolute angel today," Victoria told James as they tucked Emma into bed. "So mature, so understanding. I think she's finally adjusting to our new family dynamic." James looked relieved and grateful. "Thank you for being so patient with her, Victoria. I know it hasn't been easy. Patience is what love is all about," Victoria replied sweetly, while Emma lay rigid under her covers, staring at the ceiling and trying not to think about all the broken pieces of her mother now sitting in a dumpster somewhere. After they left her room, Emma counted the sounds of their evening routine, glasses clinking, television programs, the murmur of adult conversation that no longer included any mention of a 7-year-old girl who was learning to disappear. But Emma didn't know that her nightmare was far from over. Victoria had only begun to show her true nature, and tomorrow would bring new horrors that would push the boundaries of what a child could endure. The systematic destruction of Emma's world was proceeding exactly according to Victoria's plan, and the worst was yet to come. As Emma finally drifted into an exhausted sleep, Victoria sat in the master bedroom, examining Sarah's wedding ring on her finger and planning the next phase of her campaign. She had 2 more days to completely break the little girl's spirit before James would be away on business for 3 days. 3 days when Victoria could work without interruption to ensure that Emma would never again be a threat to her perfect new life. 2 blocks away, James's business partner received a mysterious email suggesting that the Tokyo deal James was working on was falling apart due to his emotional instability following his wife's death. The email recommended that James take some time away from the office to focus on his family. Victoria had thought of everything. Emma woke the next morning to the sound of hushed but urgent conversation coming from downstairs. Her father's voice carried a tension she hadn't heard before, and Victoria's responses were punctuated by what sounded like genuine concern. The kind of performance that had fooled him completely so far. The little girl crept to her bedroom door, pressing her ear against the cool wood. The marble floors of the penthouse carried sound beautifully when you knew how to listen, and Emma had become an expert at gathering information that might help her survive another day in her transformed home. "The partners are concerned, Victoria," James was saying, his voice heavy with stress. "They're saying I've been distracted, that my judgment might be compromised by everything that's happened." "Oh darling." Victoria's voice dripped with sympathy. "How dare they question your abilities? You've built that company from nothing. You're stronger and more capable than any of them." "But maybe they're right," James continued, and Emma could hear the self-doubt that Victoria had been carefully nurturing. "Maybe I have been distracted. Maybe Emma and I. Maybe we both need some time to heal properly." Emma's blood turned to ice. Victoria's plan was working faster than even she had anticipated. "You know what I think," Victoria said, her voice taking on that gentle, wise tone she used when she wanted to plant an idea that seemed to come from James himself. "I think you need a few days away. Clear your head, get some perspective. I could take care of Emma, give you both some space to figure out what's best for your futures." "I can't just abandon her," James protested weakly. "You're not abandoning anyone, darling. You're being a responsible father by making sure you're in the right headspace to make important decisions." And Emma ... Well, she and I need some time to bond properly, without the pressure of you watching to see if we're connecting." There was a long pause, and Emma found herself holding her breath. "Maybe you're right," James said finally. "The Hamptons' house is sitting empty. I could go out there for a few days, get away from the city noise, ... "Perfect," Victoria said, and even through the floor, Emma could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "I'll take wonderful care of our girl, and when you come back, you'll see how well we've learned to work together." The word "our" made Emma's stomach clench with nausea. Victoria was claiming ownership more boldly with each passing hour. Footsteps echoed across the marble, and Emma scrambled back to her bed, pulling the covers up to her chin and pretending to sleep. But sleep was impossible now. In a few hours, her father would leave for the Hamptons, and she would be completely alone with Victoria for 3 whole days. 3 days that Victoria had been planning for, preparing for, waiting for. When Emma finally made her way downstairs an hour later, she found James packing his briefcase with the efficient movements of a man trying to convince himself he was making the right decision. "Good morning, Princess," he said without looking up. "I have to go away for a few days. Business trip." Emma's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Can I come with you, Daddy?" For just a moment, James's hands stilled on his briefcase. But before he could respond, Victoria appeared, coffee cup in hand, wearing a silk robe that had once belonged to Sarah. "Oh, sweetheart," Victoria said with false sympathy. "Your daddy needs this time to focus on work, but we'll have such fun together. I have so many special activities planned for just the two of us." The way Victoria emphasized special activities made Emma's skin crawl, but James seemed to interpret it as genuine enthusiasm. "See," he said, finally looking at Emma with what he probably thought was reassurance. "Victoria is going to take wonderful care of you, and I'll be back before you know it." "But Daddy," Emma began. "Emma," Victoria interrupted smoothly. "Remember what we talked about yesterday? About being a good girl and not making things difficult for Daddy when he's stressed." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Emma closed her mouth, nodding silently. "That's my good girl," James said, ruffling her hair absently. "Be good for Victoria, okay?" Within an hour, he was gone. Emma stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching his car disappear into Manhattan traffic, carrying away the last person who might protect her from what was coming. Behind her, Victoria was moving through the penthouse with purposeful energy, making phone calls that would ensure their privacy. "Maria, yes, it's Victoria. Listen, I'm giving you the next 3 days off. Paid, of course. James and Emma need some quiet bonding time." "Yes, that's right, just the two of us, ... No, we won't need anything. I'll handle all the meals myself, ... Thank you, Maria." Emma turned from the window in time to see Victoria ending the call with a satisfied smile. "There," Victoria said, not bothering to hide her genuine personality anymore. "Now we can really get to know each other without any interruptions." The housekeeper left within the hour, casting worried glances at Emma that Victoria intercepted with bright reassurances about family time and building stronger relationships. After Maria's departure, the penthouse felt like a tomb, beautiful, expensive, and completely isolated from the outside world. "Now then," Victoria said, turning to Emma with predatory focus, "let's discuss the rules for our special time together." She gestured for Emma to sit on the white leather sofa, the one Sarah had picked out because it was perfect for reading bedtime stories and sharing quiet moments. Victoria perched on the edge of the coffee table, bringing her face level with Emma's, close enough that the little girl could see the calculation behind her perfectly applied makeup. "Rule number 1, Victoria began, her voice deceptively conversational, "is that you will speak only when spoken to. No more of your endless chatter about your mother. No more questions about when Daddy is coming home. No more requests for anything at all." Emma nodded mutely. "Rule number 2, you will eat what I give you, when I give it to you, and you will be grateful for every bite. No more special meals, no more preferences. No more accommodation for a spoiled little princess who thinks the world revolves around her." Victoria's smile grew sharper. "Rule number 3, you will learn to be useful. This penthouse doesn't clean itself, and since you're going to be living here on my sufferance, you're going to earn your keep. But I'm only 7, Emma whispered. Victoria's hand moved so fast that Emma didn't see it coming. The slap across her face was precise and controlled, hard enough to sting and shock, but not hard enough to leave a mark that might raise questions later. Rule number 4, Victoria continued as if nothing had happened, while Emma held her burning cheek, is that you never ever tell me what you can or cannot do because of your age. Children in other parts of the world work from the time they can walk. You're going to learn what real responsibility looks like. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but Victoria wasn't finished. And the most important rule of all, Emma, everything that happens between us during these 3 days is our secret. When your father comes home, you're going to tell him what a wonderful time we had together. You're going to tell him how much you love your new mummy, and how grateful you are for everything I've done for you. But you're not my mummy, Emma said, before she could stop herself. This time, Victoria didn't slap her. Instead, she grabbed Emma's chin roughly, forcing the child to look directly into her cold eyes. Your mother is dead, Emma. Dead and buried and rotting in the ground. She's never coming back. She's never going to save you. And every day that passes, your father remembers her less and loves me more. Soon, he'll forget she ever existed, and so will you. The cruelty was breathtaking, but Victoria wasn't done. I am your mother now. I am the only mother you're ever going to have. And you will learn to love me, or you will learn what happens to little girls who refuse to adapt to their new reality. She released Emma's chin with a little shove that sent the child tumbling back against the sofa cushions. Now, Victoria said, standing and smoothing her silk robe, let's begin your education. The kitchen floor needs scrubbing, and you're going to learn how to do it properly. What followed was 3 hours of systematic humiliation. Victoria provided Emma with a bucket of scalding hot water and harsh cleaning chemicals that made her eyes water and her small hands burn. She was forced to scrub every inch of the marble floor on her hands and knees while Victoria watched from a chair, occasionally criticizing her technique or ordering her to start over when the results didn't meet her standards. Your mother never taught you the value of hard work, did she? Victoria commented as Emma struggled with the heavy bucket. She filled your head with nonsense about being special instead of teaching you practical skills. Emma bit her lip to keep from responding, but Victoria seemed determined to provoke a reaction. Of course, Sarah never had to worry about real work. She married your father when he was already successful, just waltzed into a life of luxury without earning any of it. But you are going to learn what it means to deserve what you have. The little girl's hands were raw and bleeding by the time Victoria declared the floor acceptable. But instead of allowing her a break, Victoria immediately moved on to the next task. The bathrooms need attention next. All 4 of them. I want them spotless. For the rest of the day, Emma worked like a servant in her own home. Victoria had calculated every task to be just difficult enough to be achievable, but exhausting, forcing the child to stretch on tiptoes to reach high surfaces, to lift cleaning supplies that were too heavy for her small frame, to repeat jobs over and over until they met Victoria's impossible standards. And through it all, Victoria maintained a running commentary designed to break down Emma's sense of self-worth. You know, Emma, I've been thinking about what your father said this morning, about how maybe you both need time to heal. I think he's starting to realize that keeping you around is just making it harder for him to move on with his life. Emma stumbled while carrying a bucket of cleaning water, sloshing some onto the marble floor she had just finished cleaning. Clumsy, Victoria observed with satisfaction. Just like your mother was. Did you know she was clumsy? Always dropping things, always making mistakes. It's probably why she died in that car accident, too careless to pay attention to what she was doing. That's not true, Emma burst out, tears streaming down her face. Mummy wasn't clumsy, she was perfect. Victoria's smile was triumphant. There's that temper she gave you. That inability to control yourself when things don't go your way. Your father mentioned that too, how difficult you've become, how unpredictable. I'm not difficult, Emma sobbed. I'm good. I try to be good." "You try to be good," Victoria repeated mockingly. "But it's not enough, is it? Because good isn't good enough for a man like your father. He needs excellence. He needs peace. He needs a family that enhances his life, instead of complicating it." She crouched down in front of Emma, grabbing the child's chin again, forcing her to meet her eyes. "Here's the truth, little girl. Your father is going to realize over the next few days that his life is better without you in it. Quieter, simpler, more focused. And when he comes home, he's going to be ready to make some very important decisions about your future." "What kind of decisions?" Emma whispered. "The kind that will give him the peace he deserves and the fresh start we both need." Victoria stood, leaving Emma kneeling on the wet floor surrounded by cleaning supplies, her small body shaking with exhaustion and terror. "But don't worry," Victoria added with false sweetness. "I'm going to make sure these next 2 days prepare you perfectly for what's coming. You're going to learn exactly what your place is in this family and what happens to little girls who forget their place." That night, Emma was sent to bed without dinner, her stomach cramping with hunger and her hands too sore to close properly. Victoria had declared that the bathroom cleaning hadn't met her standards and would need to be redone the next day, along with a longer list of increasingly demanding chores. As Emma lay in her stripped-down bedroom, Victoria had removed the remaining furniture that morning. Declaring it too childish for a girl who needed to grow up fast, she could hear Victoria moving around the penthouse, rearranging things, making phone calls, planning. From her bed, Emma could see the city lights twinkling through her window. Thousands of families going about their normal evening routines, helping with homework, sharing dinner, tucking children into bed with stories and kisses and promises that tomorrow would be another day full of love and possibilities. But Emma's world had shrunk to a series of threats and punishments, ruled by a woman who seemed to take genuine pleasure in her suffering. And with 2 more days until her father returned, she had no idea how much worse things could get. What Emma didn't know was that Victoria's real plan was just beginning. The physical labor and psychological torture of the first day were merely preparation for what Victoria had planned for tomorrow. Tests that would either break Emma's spirit completely or force her to fight back in a way that would justify everything Victoria intended to do to her. In the master bedroom, Victoria sat at Sarah's old vanity, wearing Sarah's jewelry and planning the next phase of her campaign. She had 2 more days to ensure that when James returned, he would find a situation that required immediate and permanent action. 2 more days to destroy a little girl's life so completely that even she would believe she deserved whatever happened to her next. But Victoria had made one critical miscalculation. In her arrogance and cruelty, she had underestimated the one thing that would ultimately destroy her father's love buried beneath grief and exhaustion. Waiting for the right moment to emerge with the fury of a man who realized he had failed to protect the most precious thing in his world. Tomorrow would bring that moment closer than Victoria could ever imagine. Emma woke on the 3rd morning to silence, a terrible, anticipatory silence that felt like the calm before a hurricane. Her small body ached from 2 days of forced labor. Her hands were still raw from the harsh cleaning chemicals, and her stomach cramped with hunger. Victoria had decided that earning meals was part of Emma's education, and yesterday the child had earned nothing but a slice of stale bread and a cup of water. From downstairs came the sound of Victoria moving around the kitchen, humming what sounded almost like a celebration song. There was an energy in the house today that felt different, expectant. Final. Today was the day Victoria had been building toward. Emma forced herself to get up, her bare feet touching the cold marble floor. Victoria had taken away her slippers 2 days ago, declaring them unnecessary luxury for a child who needs to learn the value of discomfort. Every step on the freezing marble was a reminder of how completely her world had been stripped away. When she reached the kitchen, Emma found Victoria standing at the stove, fully dressed in a burgundy silk dress despite the early hour. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup applied with precision, and she wore Sarah's wedding ring along with what looked like the rest of Sarah's jewelry collection. She looked like she was preparing for an important performance. "Good morning, Emma," Victoria said without turning around. "Today is a very special day. Emma said nothing, having learned that speaking without permission resulted in punishment. Your father will be home this evening, Victoria continued. Stirring something in a pan that smelled delicious eggs, Benedict, Emma realized, her mouth watering despite her fear. And I want everything to be perfect for his return. She turned, and Emma saw that Victoria's smile was different today. Not the cold calculation of the past 2 days, but something that looked almost ... excited. I've been thinking about our conversation on that first night, Victoria said, moving closer to Emma with predatory grace. About what happens to little girls who don't learn to be invisible. And I've realized that I've been too patient with you. Emma's stomach clenched with terror, but she remained silent. You see, Emma, your father is coming home today, expecting to find that we've bonded. That you've learned to love your new mother. But we both know that's not true, don't we? Victoria circled Emma like a shark, her heels clicking against the marble. In fact, I think you hate me more now than you did 3 days ago. I think you're planning to tell him everything that's happened. I think you believe that your precious daddy will choose you over me. Emma's silence seemed to infuriate Victoria. Well, let me give you a reality check, little girl. Your father asked me to marry him because he needed someone to take care of his burden. He needed someone to manage the problem of a grieving child so he could get back to his real life. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. Victoria moved to the kitchen island, where she had laid out what looked like a formal place setting, fine china, crystal glasses, silver cutlery arranged with military precision. Today, you're going to help me prepare a special welcome home dinner for your father. You're going to learn what it means to be truly useful, not just pretending to clean bathrooms, but actually contributing something valuable. She gestured toward the stove, where several pans were heating. We're going to cook together, Emma. A real bonding experience. And if anything goes wrong, if you burn the food, if you make a mess, if you fail to follow my instructions perfectly well, that will just prove that you're not capable of being part of this family. Emma stared at the stove, confused. Victoria had spent 3 days teaching her that she was worthless, clumsy, unwanted. Now she wanted her to cook. Don't look so confused, Victoria said with false sweetness. This is your chance to prove that you can be useful. Your chance to show that you deserve to stay in your father's life. But Emma could see the trap being set. The stove was already too hot, the pans were heating too quickly, and Victoria was positioning everything so that failure was inevitable. Now, Victoria said, moving behind Emma and placing her hands on the child's shoulders. Let's start with something simple. We're going to caramelize some sugar for a special dessert. She guided Emma toward the stove, where a small saucepan of sugar was already beginning to bubble and turn golden. You need to stir it very carefully, Victoria instructed, her voice taking on that hypnotically false sweetness. If you let it burn, the whole dessert will be ruined. If you splash any of it, it will stick to everything it touches. Emma picked up the wooden spoon with trembling hands. The sugar was bubbling violently now, spitting and hissing as it transformed into liquid amber. Faster, Victoria urged, pressing closer behind her. It's going to burn if you don't stir faster. Emma tried to stir more quickly, but the pan was too heavy, the spoon too long for her small hands. Hot sugar splattered onto the stovetop, filling the air with acrid smoke. Clumsy, Victoria snapped. Just like your mother. No wonder she died, she couldn't pay attention to what she was doing either. That's not true, Emma cried, spinning around to face Victoria. It was exactly what Victoria had been waiting for. How dare you raise your voice to me? Victoria shrieked, her mask finally slipping completely. How dare you talk back? She grabbed Emma's wrist, forcing the child's hand toward the burner where another pan was heating. You want to know what happens to disrespectful little girls? Victoria hissed. You want to know what happens when children forget their place? Emma screamed as Victoria forced her hand closer to the flames, the heat radiating against her palm. But Victoria wasn't done. From beside the stove, she grabbed something that made Emma's blood freeze with terror. A culinary torch, the kind used for creme brulee, with a bright blue flame that hissed like an angry snake. This is what happens to little girls who think they can fight back, Victoria said, her voice deadly calm as she ignited the torch. This is what happens when children refuse to learn their lessons. The flame danced in front of Emma's face, close enough that she could feel its heat, could smell the gas, could see Victoria's face illuminated by its glow. What she saw there was pure, calculated evil. "Please," Emma whispered, her whole body shaking. "Please, I'll be good. I'll be invisible. I'll do anything you want." "It's too late for that," Victoria said softly. "You had your chance to learn. Now you're going to learn what real pain feels like." She grabbed Emma's wrist, forcing the child's hand palm up, and brought the torch closer. Emma's screams filled the kitchen as the flame approached her skin, as Victoria's face twisted with satisfaction. And then the front door exploded open. "EMMA." James's voice boomed through the penthouse like thunder. He had come home early, worried by a nagging feeling that something was wrong. Driven by an instinct he'd been suppressing for days. He took in the scene in an instant, his daughter backed against the stove, her hand raised defensively, Victoria holding a blazing torch like a weapon, the smell of burning sugar and gas thick in the air. "My hand hurts so much, please stop." Emma screamed, not even seeing her father yet, too terrified to process anything but the flame in Victoria's hand. "Get away from her," James roared, launching himself across the kitchen with a fury that shocked even him. Victoria spun around, the torch still in her hand, her face a mask of guilt and rage. "James, you're early. I saw what you were doing." James's voice shook the entire penthouse. He grabbed the torch from Victoria's hand, extinguishing it with a violence that spoke to how close he'd come to using it on her instead. Emma collapsed to the floor, sobbing, cradling her hand against her chest. James dropped to his knees beside her, gathering her into his arms, and what he saw broke his heart completely. His daughter was skeletal, her clothes hanging loose on her small frame. Her hands were raw and bleeding, her face gaunt with hunger and exhaustion. Dark circles ringed her eyes, and when she looked at him, he saw a fear so deep it made him physically sick. "Baby girl," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Oh my God, baby girl. What has she done to you, Daddy?" Emma's voice was barely audible. "You came back." "I'm here," James said, pulling her closer, feeling how light she was, how fragile. "I'm here, and I'm never leaving you again." Victoria was backing toward the kitchen island, her perfect composure finally cracking. "James, you don't understand. She's been impossible defiant. I was trying to teach her." "Teach her what?" James exploded, standing with Emma still in his arms. "Teach her to fear for her life. Teach her that the people who are supposed to protect her are monsters." "She's been lying to you," Victoria shrieked, desperation creeping into her voice. "She's manipulative, just like her mother. She's trying to turn you against me." James looked down at his daughter, really looked at her for the first time in months. He saw the weight loss, the injuries, the bone-deep terror in her eyes. He saw what his grief and negligence had allowed to happen. "Emma," he said gently, "tell me the truth. Has Victoria been hurting you?" Emma's eyes flickered to Victoria, still conditioned by days of threats and torture. She said if I told you, she'd send me away to a special school where bad children go," Emma whispered. "She said you didn't want me anymore because I reminded you of Mummy." The words hit James like physical blows. He thought about the past few days, about how readily he'd accepted Victoria's suggestions that he needed time away, that Emma was becoming a burden. He realized with sickening clarity how completely he'd been manipulated. "Victoria," James said, his voice deadly quiet, "get out of my house." "James, please, get out," he roared. "Get out, before I do something that will put me in prison." Victoria grabbed her purse, her composure completely shattered. "You'll regret this, James. That child will destroy your life, just like her mother destroyed it. You'll come begging me to take her back." "The only thing I regret," James said coldly, "is not seeing what you really are before you had the chance to hurt my daughter." As Victoria fled toward the front door, James was already pulling out his phone. 911. "I need police and paramedics at the Mitchell penthouse. A child has been abused and tortured. The perpetrator just fled the scene. Within minutes, the penthouse was filled with police officers, paramedics, and child protective services workers. Emma was examined, photographed, her injuries documented. Victoria was arrested in the building's lobby, still wearing Sarah's jewelry, still protesting her innocence, even as the evidence mounted against her. Detective Sarah Chen, who had handled child abuse cases for over a decade, took James aside while Emma was being treated by paramedics. "Mr. Mitchell," she said gently, "your daughter is going to need extensive therapy. What she's been through, it's going to take time for her to heal. Whatever she needs," James said immediately. "Money is no object. I just want her to be okay. The physical injuries will heal," Detective Chen continued. "It's the psychological trauma that concerns us. She's been systematically terrorized, made to believe that she was unwanted, that she deserved punishment." James watched as a paramedic carefully bandaged Emma's hands, his own hands clenched into fists. "How could I have been so blind? How could I have let this happen?" "Predators like Victoria Sterling are experts at manipulation," Detective Chen explained. "They know exactly how to isolate their victims, how to make the adults around them complicit without realizing it. This isn't your fault, Mr. Mitchell. But what happens now that is your responsibility?" 3 hours later, after Victoria had been charged with child abuse, assault, and a dozen other crimes, James sat beside Emma's hospital bed. The doctors wanted to keep her overnight for observation, to make sure her injuries weren't more serious than they appeared. Emma was awake, but quiet, staring at the bandages on her hands. "Daddy," she said finally. "Yes, Princess. Are you going to send me away?" James felt his heart break all over again. "Never. Emma, I am never, ever going to send you away. You are the most important thing in my entire world, and I am so sorry that I let you forget that." "But," Victoria said. Victoria was lying, James interrupted gently. "About everything. She was a sick person who tried to hurt you because she was jealous of how much I love you." Emma was quiet for a long moment. "Do you really love me more than you loved her?" "Emma," James said, taking her small hand carefully in his, "I love you more than my own life. More than my business, more than money, more than anything in this world. You are my daughter, my heart, my reason for getting up every morning. And I promise you, I swear to you on your mother's memory, that no one will ever hurt you again." For the first time in days, Emma smiled, small, fragile thing, but real. "Can we go home soon?" she asked. "We can go home whenever you're ready," James said. "And when we do, we're going to start over. Just you and me. The way it should have been all along." 6 months later, Victoria Sterling was sentenced to 15 years in prison for child abuse and attempted assault with a deadly weapon. The trial made national headlines, with child advocacy groups using the case to highlight the dangers of predators who target vulnerable families. James took a leave of absence from his company, spending every day helping Emma heal. They went to therapy together, rebuilt their bedtime story tradition, and slowly, carefully, learned to be a family again. Emma still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched when she heard certain sounds, but she was laughing again, playing again, believing again that she was loved and wanted and safe. And James never again forgot that no business deal, no amount of money, no grief or exhaustion was more important than protecting the little girl who called him daddy, because some things, once broken by cruelty, can only be healed by love, patient, consistent, unshakable love that proves, day after day, that the most precious treasures in life are not things that can be bought or sold, but hearts that choose to stay connected no matter what darkness tries to tear them apart. Emma learned that she was not invisible, not unwanted, not alone. And Victoria learned that there are some lines that, once crossed, lead only to justice.